Today, I visited one of the most haunted castles in England. I was completely on my own, and I can tell you it was creepy as hell. Especially in the notorious Haunted Ladies Chamber, where something happened many years ago that will chill you to the core. And to think I was just in that room on my own makes my skin crawl. Without further ado, this is the haunting of Tamworth Castle. So today I'm going to be discussing the history of the area of Tamworth and the castle itself, starting with when and why the castle was built and who for. Then we'll move on to the hauntings, why the castle is said to be so haunted, and some of the incredibly creepy stories that are said to come from the castle. I'm lucky enough to have lived a stone's throw from Tamworth Castle for a few years, so I'm around the area a lot. However, I haven't visited the castle itself since I was a kid. In fact, the castle has been close to the heart of my own family for some generations. My mum's great uncle, so my nan's uncle on her dad's side, was a man named Tommy Cooper. No, not the comedian. Tommy was groundskeeper at the castle for some years. If you've ever seen the beautiful flower displays around the castle, Uncle Tommy used to tend to those, and what a fantastic job he did. So, a bit of a creepy side story. My mum said when she was to visit Uncle Tommy as a kid, he lived in his own private quarters on the castle grounds. He had a pet German Shepherd dog to keep him company. This dog would stand at the bottom of the stairs, staring upstairs, growling and barking, but would flat out refuse to take one step up those stairs. Like there's definitely something up there that nobody else can see. I am not going up there. Spooky. Anyway, on my virtual tour around England, exploring the most haunted places the internet can throw at me, I thought, why not start close to home so it's easier for me to physically visit the places I'm talking about? And what better place to start than Tamworth Castle? So this morning, I woke up and that's exactly what I decided to do. As you approach the castle, you can see that obviously it's quite a large, formidable structure. You enter via like a raised stone causeway, and there's an ancient herringbone wall at the side which is said to date back to Norman times. The castle itself opens at 9:30 AM, but me being me, I arrived 10 minutes before opening time, giving me the opportunity to take in the view of St Editha's Church in the distance. In all the years I've spent around the area, I never realised how beautiful that church is. I suppose this morning I was there with a purpose and a camera. But that church really is magnificent. So when the castle opened, I was greeted by two lovely staff members in reception, where I purchased a guide to the castle and a booklet about the castle's ghosts. One of the ladies gave me a brief insight into the history of the castle and what I'd come across on my tour. Other than these two ladies, there was one other staff member upstairs who had a story of her own to tell, and I'm telling you now, if I was her and I'd experienced what she had experienced, there's no way I'd be on the upper floor of that castle on my own. Not a chance. But we'll come to that later. So other than these three staff members, I was completely alone in the castle, which was nice as I got to explore the castle at my own leisure, but it was also insanely creepy in certain areas, the Haunted Ladies Chamber and the Haunted Stairwell especially. In fact, why lie, pretty much the whole castle is creepy as hell when you're on your own. So I started in the Great Hall, which is just off the courtyard. Some lovely medieval artefacts to see in there, suits of arms, weapons, things like that. Then just at the side of the courtyard there's this really creepy stone staircase that leads up to a small opening at the top. This is called the intramural passageway. The intramural passageway. Intramural passageway. There we go. I believe this was used as a safe walkway for the soldiers between the inner and outer walls of the Shell Keep. But I literally nearly broke my neck filming walking up those crooked stone steps. Completely my own fault, but if you do visit the castle, take heed. After nearly breaking my neck, I headed over to the other side of the courtyard where I found the dungeon. There's not all that much to see in here as you would in other dungeons, for example, brutal torture devices, which I have a sick fascination for. There's just these set of stocks, I think they're called. You know, where people put your head and your hands through and it locks over the top. But there was a barrel and some random tree stumps that were maybe used as chopping blocks. Oh, and a really creepy cutout of an evil looking peasant man. not someone I'd like to bump into on a dark night at the castle. That was quite judgmental. He might have been a bloody nice bloke who just fell on hard times. I don't know. Anyway, after the dungeon, I headed into the main building where there was plenty of information boards about the armoury and the different weapons that would have been used to defend the castle through the years. Then I headed upstairs where there was more information about the Saxons and that other member of staff I mentioned earlier, who played a short film on a projector, although there appeared to be some technical difficulties with the projector at first, i.e. she struggled to get the thing playing, but we got there in the end. The film is okay, it lasts 5 to 10 minutes, imagine a short, much less violent Game of Thrones type scene. So after the film, I got talking to the girl who was showing me some of the ancient artifacts that had been discovered not too far from the castle in 2009 if memory serves me correctly. We then got talking about the ghosts of the castle, and I asked if she'd seen anything paranormal in the castle herself. She seemed reluctant to tell me at first, insisting that her experience was kinda hard to explain. So she said basically there was her and one other staff member in the castle in the drawing room just downstairs from where we were standing at that very moment. They were getting ready to finish up and go home when she insists that she saw and heard someone walk up the stairs. The other girl said, well, that's impossible, we're the only people left here in the castle. Thinking that maybe a guest had overstayed their welcome, she came upstairs to where we were standing having this very conversation. That film on the projector, you know, the one that was almost impossible to get started, yeah, that film was playing full blast, and she said she knew for absolute certain she had turned the thing off, like completely off. So that's just one of many paranormal encounters that have occurred within the castle. Trust me, we'll come on to plenty more later. After chatting with this girl and hearing her traumatic experience, I then decided to head over to the most haunted part of the castle. Great timing. Without even knowing which part of the castle is the most haunted, you definitely get a feeling when you enter this area that there's a different energy here to the rest of the castle. So I slowly wandered past the haunted stairwell, gingerly having a peek down as I passed through into the infamous, haunted ladies' chamber. There's a story synonymous with this room that goes back many, many years, and this is believed to be where the haunting of this room first manifested, but we'll come to that later. After spending some time wandering back and forth between the haunted stairwell and the ladies' chamber, hoping or hoping not to get a glimpse of something paranormal, I took a quick tour around the rest of the castle, including the very top of the castle where the views are quite incredible. Again, you can see the awesome St. Editha's Church in the distance. There were many more rooms to look around, but let's be honest, I was just here for the ghosts. Just show me those paranormal entities. So now that I've finished waffling on about my visit to the castle, let's take a proper look at the history of the castle and the surrounding area. So obviously, Tamworth Castle is situated in Grimsby. No, it's not, I'm only joking, it's in Tamworth, which is actually part of Staffordshire. But it sits only 14 miles northeast of my hometown, Birmingham. Alright, let's take a little trip back in time, shall we? Little old Tamworth is a town in Staffordshire that's been kicking about since the days of the Saxons. And honestly, it's got way more history than most people realise. In fact, it's got way more history than even I realised. So picture this, it's the 7th century and Tamworth is pretty much the capital of Mercia, one of the big 3 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the other 2 being Northumbria and Wessex. Yeah, Tamworth wasn't just some little village. This place was an absolute power hub for a while. The real VIP at the time was King Offa. You might have heard of Offa's Dyke. Well, if you haven't, it's a massive earthwork that basically marked the boundary between Mercia and Wales. He ruled from around 757 to 790 and he turned Tamworth into a political and military stronghold. There's even evidence that he had a royal palace here. And get this, Tamworth had its own mint. Yep, that's right, they were coining money here in the 8th and 9th centuries. That kind of thing only happened in places with serious status. But of course, no good Saxon story is complete without the Vikings showing up to ruin the party. In 874, the Danes raided and absolutely trashed Tamworth. However, the town didn't stay down for long. Along came Ethelfled, daughter of King Alfred the Great. She's sometimes called the Lady of the Mercians. She was a proper warrior queen, leading armies and building fortresses. In 913, she rebuilt Tamworth's defence and turned it into a fortified burh. Basically, a walled town that could hold its own against any more of that Viking nonsense. Ethelfled actually died in Tamworth in 918, and by then the town was once again a serious place of power in Anglo-Saxon England. Fast forward to 1066, the Normans arrive, and by this time England's playing by a whole new set of rules. Tamworth doesn't fade into the background though. Instead, we get the iconic Tamworth Castle. It was built shortly after the conquests, probably around 1080, by the Norman lord Robert Despenser. It's a Motte and Bailey design, classic early Norman stuff, originally constructed from timber, and obviously it's still standing strong today, perched upon its mound looking out over the River Tame. The castle changed hands loads of times over the centuries, but it's one of the best preserved Motte and Bailey castles in all of England. Honestly, if those walls could talk. During the medieval period, Tamworth settled into a quieter rhythm, becoming a proper market town. It was granted a royal charter in 1315, which allowed it to hold markets and fairs, crucial for local trade. The town developed around the castle with timber-framed buildings popping up and industries like tanning, leatherworking and wool taking off. It wasn't London, but it was thriving in its own right. And like most medieval towns, Tamworth had its fair share of ups and downs. Plague outbreaks, fires, you name it. But resilient old Tamworth just kept bouncing back. By the time the Tudors were in power, from 1485 to 1603, Tamworth had started to modernise, relatively speaking. One of the coolest parts of this era is how much Tamworth Castle itself evolved. The Ferrers family, who owned the castle through the Tudor and Stuart eras, turned it into more of a stately home. It was during this era that the south wing of the castle was completed. This was the last structure to be built within the courtyard. You also started to see more brick buildings popping up around town, which was a big change from all the wattle and daub stuff. Tamworth Grammar School was founded in the 16th century too, giving the town a bit of an educational edge. And during the English Civil War in the mid-1600s, Tamworth was caught in the crossfire between the Royalists and the Parliamentarians. The castle was actually garrisoned for the king at one point, but it fell to Parliament in 1643. Now jump ahead to the 18th and 19th centuries, and Tamworth's really starting to take shape as the town we recognise today. The Industrial Revolution changed everything, and Tamworth was no exception. The arrival of the canals in the late 1700s, like the Coventry Canal and the Birmingham and Fazeley Canal, turned the town into a bit of a transport hub. The castle itself experienced changes in fortune. It had been left in a neglected state for some time, but was now seeing renovations under the new owners, the Townshend family, with replacement windows and rebuilding of the external wall of the South Range. Later in the 19th century, the railways were constructed, adding to Tamworth's transport links. Industries like brickmaking, textiles and brewing took off. One of the town's most famous exports, the Tamworth pig. A hardy little breed with reddish hair, often used to improve stock in other breeds. Between the years of 1837 and 1901, the castle was purchased by public subscription and Tamworth Borough Corporation to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria in 1897. In 1899, the castle was first opened up to the public as a museum. Also, you can't talk about Tamworth in the 1800s without mentioning Sir Robert Peel. He was MP for Tamworth and is often credited as the founder of the modern police force, hence the word bobbies. He also served twice as Prime Minister, and his family lived in Drayton Manor just outside town. Probably the most well-known attraction in the area these days is Drayton Manor Park, or Drayton Manor Resort as it's now called, which is a relatively small theme park by most standards. Also home to Thomasland and a zoo. It's great for kids, you should really check it out. In the early 1800s, Tamworth even got its first newspaper, which tells you it was growing in influence and population. So from Saxon kings to warrior queens, to Norman castles, Viking raids, Civil War skirmishes and the hustle of the industrial age, little old Tamworth really has seen it all. Obviously, I wouldn't be talking about Tamworth Castle on this channel if there weren't some ghosts involved. And bloody hell, does Tamworth Castle have some serious ghosts. Strap yourself in, we're going on one hell of a haunted ghost ride. But before we move on to the ghost stories, if you're enjoying this episode and would like to see more, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Honestly, it's the only way for my channel to get picked up by the YouTube algorithm gods. It's quick, it's free, and it helps me out enormously. Plus, if you don't click the like button, the ghost of Saint Editha will swap your sugar with salt while you're asleep. And nobody wants salt in their coffee in the morning. Now, onto the ghosts. Is Tamworth Castle haunted? This is a question that staff members are frequently asked by visitors. And the answer is a resounding yes. Tamworth Castle is 900 years old. It's been owned by 5 powerful families, and as we've already discussed, it's witnessed several turbulent key events in English history. Over the years, there have been far too many things heard and seen within these ancient walls for the possibility to be ignored that people from the past are still with us in some form or another. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? How can a place so ancient, with so many stories, not have some kind of lingering energy? I'm about to talk to you about some of the more interesting and mystifying phenomena experienced by both staff and visitors alike, going room by room, ending up in the most haunted room in the castle. Although, as you're about to discover, pretty much everywhere you walk in this castle, there's probably someone watching you. And I'm not talking about the staff members. What kind of phenomena has been witnessed? Let's start by talking about the different types of phenomena that have been and continue to be experienced in the castle. Ghosts and apparitions can manifest themselves in many ways, sometimes as smells and sounds, sometimes as lights and orbs, and sometimes it can be as simple as a change in the atmosphere of a room. Temperatures may vary considerably from hot to cold, and people can even feel an emotional change as they encounter energy from the spirit world. Ghosts come in 2 main varieties: residual energy and spirit energy. Residual energy ghosts are like video replays and do not interact with you. They are merely a visual and emotional state that was captured in time to be seen by those people who are receptive to it. I remember when I was younger, probably early teens, I lived in a house where we had some weird shit going on, particularly in my bedroom. So my mum called in a psychic medium. This lady came to the house and told us that there used to be a man living on his own in the house. One day he started walking up the stairs, and halfway up he had a heart attack. He made it to the top of the stairs, then passed away in my bedroom. She said his spirit was a residual energy that relived his final moments, hence the weird activity I'd experienced in my bedroom. There's a funny story to this actually. So the medium told us if we experienced anything that scares us, politely ask the spirit to leave us alone and they'd go away. So that very night we'd all gone to bed, and at some point my bed started shaking. So there's me thinking, bloody hell, the medium has disturbed this spirit and now he's really pissed off with us. Anyway, it didn't last too long, so eventually I went to sleep. Well, the next morning I was talking to my sister about what had happened. And she was like, oh my god, that happened to me too. I just kept saying, please leave me alone, please leave me alone, please leave me alone. Well, it turns out that we hadn't pissed off a poltergeist, and as sheer coincidence, we had an earthquake that night. We literally never get earthquakes in England. I'm waffling again. Spirit energy ghosts are real and can interact with you. They might touch you, or talk to you, or even appear for you. Yeah, I mean, seeing any kind of apparition is going to give you the willies, but one that can talk to you or touch you, that's a firm no from me, thank you very much. So where have ghosts been seen in Tamworth Castle? Just about everywhere, and they're not particular to the time of day either. Many strange happenings have occurred in broad daylight, but nighttime is more common, as spirits are easier to detect and see in the cover of darkness. So we'll begin this ghost trail in the courtyard, and follow the normal visitor route through the castle. Let's start at reception. This was once the lobby to the Tudor Warder's Lodge. It's seen many visitors within its small space. In 1964, Norman Seckington, the castle's living custodian, let his pet spaniel into the courtyard last thing at night for a runaround. The dog started whining at the door, and he was eventually let in by Norman. Seconds later, the dog flew out with wild eyes and bristling hair. He bolted out through the main door and was never seen again. In 1978, the room was used for storage, and the collections officer had put some items into the room and locked the door. 2 days later, he found the door was very hard to open because a table had become jammed up against the other side of the door. And nobody could access that room because it was locked, and the only window faced the courtyard, and it was boarded up. To this day, the mystery remains unresolved. Now we're going to move from the reception area into the courtyard itself. Many ghostly apparitions of soldiers have been seen in the courtyard over the years. 2 of the creepiest sightings that have been reported involve a soldier who was seen carrying a longbow, and a tall man dressed in leather who was seen walking alongside a horse from an area of the castle that wasn't even built until the early 1600s. The residual energies of 4 soldiers were seen on another occasion running slowly from the corner of the courtyard towards the castle entrance. They wore Georgian tricorn hats, red tunics with elaborate lacework, and all carried old-style flint rifles and bayonets dating from the 1700s. It may come as no surprise that the dungeon has also been the site of numerous paranormal sightings. During medieval times, the dungeon was used as a temporary holding place for prisoners, and many visitors have become lightheaded and nauseous when standing in the dungeon. The following are the more disturbing experiences felt in this confined space. The residual energy of a man who has been chained by the ankles and strangled has been seen lurking behind the barred door. Several witnesses have seen a man hanging from the centre of the room and sensed prisoners fighting for food because they were starving. On another occasion, a medium was pushed from behind by an entity who was thought to have been a jailer. He was a big man with short, dark cropped hair and a beard. The feeling of being pushed or pressed against is quite a frequent occurrence in here. The normal exhibition room was previously used as a storage space. Several people have seen horses and grooms dating from the 1600s in here. Nuns have also been witnessed meditating and praying as though trying to hide themselves in a panic. Even the toilets of Tamworth Castle are home to some ghostly residents. Both sets of toilets have had their fair share of spooky happenings. They were once part of the medieval undercroft. A particularly chilling incident involved a museum assistant who once heard some commotion coming from the men's toilets as she was locking up. She waited for them to come out, but after waiting for some time, she became suspicious and looked into the room, only to find it completely empty. An even more sinister experience saw another castle employee who was actually locked in the ladies' toilets by an unseen force that prevented the door from opening before the door slowly opened of its own accord. Yeah, I can safely say that would have scared the shit out of me too. Yet another employee was alone in the men's toilets washing his hands when he heard a click and saw that the wall heater had been turned on by itself, with absolutely nobody anywhere near it. So this wasn't one of those heaters that are on a timer or a sensor or a thermostat or anything like that. He had to physically push the switch to turn the thing on. Moving on, we're going to head towards the stairs. Stairs often have energy associated with them, and the Tudor North Stairs in Tamworth Castle are no exception. 2 nuns have been seen here on more than one occasion. The younger nun is said to have flawless skin and blue eyes, and she is supported by an older nun who is giving her moral and physical support as they walk down the stairs together. Visitors have also reported the feeling of being pushed and even kicked on these stairs by an unseen force. As we head up to the dining room, we find yet more reports of paranormal activity. There are several residual energies in this room thought to be dating back to the 1600s. A lady with curly hair and a long dress was seen walking through the room in an awkward way, as if moving around an obstacle in front of the fireplace. A tall, arrogant man in flamboyant royalist attire, carrying a sword, can often be seen walking back and forth across the room, also near the fireplace. Sometimes the aroma of sweet violets are smelt as the room is opened up by staff first thing in the morning. The antechamber is a small room that was once linked by an outside doorway to the kitchens. It also has the odd ghostly inhabitant or two. A very old lady in a rocking chair has been seen in this room, mixing something in a bowl, and it's thought that she was most unhappy about someone who was arriving at the castle. An agitated young woman in Tudor-style servant's clothes has also been seen from the window, running along the battlements towards the Tamworth story. The day parlour is the room where King James I was alleged to have slept when he visited the castle in 1619. However, the only entity in the room seems to be a very fat man with a royal connection. He wears a wig and a wide blue cummerbund around his waist and seems to be of the Georgian era. A medium during a recent vigil made his way down the haunted stairs and was surprised to see the door swing open for him to pass through. When he entered the room to thank the person he believed had opened the door for him, there was absolutely nobody there. We'll definitely be hearing more about those haunted stairs very soon. The Tamworth story. So this floor of the castle was once servants' quarters, but now houses an exhibition charting the history of Tamworth. Many staff and visitors feel that there is an unseen presence watching them in this room and want to hurry through it as quickly as possible. Two of the most baffling incidents involved the same museum assistant. On the first occasion, she was opening up the Tamworth story when she was struck in the face and momentarily blinded. She said it felt like sand had been thrown in her face. When she cleared her eyes, she saw a 6-foot-high blue mist swirl around the room near the Gibson Canning display before disappearing out of the window. On another occasion, she experienced extreme cold during 2 ghost tours, which was evident to those around her. She said that she felt it creep up through her body from the ground as she stood near the Roman exhibition. On both occasions, the cold left her as soon as she moved away from that room. The guard room was once a bedchamber to the Ferrers family. It seems to be the domain of a particularly angry spirit who doesn't want to be disturbed. The landing outside the room is also a place where people feel watched. The ghostly apparition of a lady has been seen standing there. Now we come to the servants' chamber. Until recently, this room was presented as a chapel, but there's no records to support the claim that it was ever actually used as a chapel. It's strange then that one of the more interesting sightings is that of a ghostly priest. During a recent vigil, people began to feel a sense of oppression, and about 25 men appeared around the walls, shrouded in a ghostly mist. These were said to be country folk who had been pressed into battle and who were being blessed by a priest. On another occasion, an elderly man wearing a mitre hat and fine clothes was seen unfolding a red cloth with a white trim and laying it over a table. The table held 2 cups of wine and 2 candlesticks, as though in preparation for a private mass. The ghostly apparition of a man has also been seen hanging from the central beam on more than one occasion. His legs are tied up, which is why he hangs in this confined space. In the Ferrers room, located below the servants' chamber, there have been several reports of ghostly activity in this normally tranquil room that was at one time a nursery. The chilling sound of young children and babies crying has been heard in here, along with the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor, when the room was completely empty. Staff based below in reception have often heard loud bangs and noises coming from the room. The most chilling experience took place on a cold winter's night in 1999. The castle's alarm had gone off, and while the museum assistant was sat waiting for the engineer to come and reset the alarm, she was sitting in the reception area. She claimed that she heard the odd footstep here and there, which was nothing unusual. But then the sounds got louder, until she could clearly hear the sound of tables and chairs dragging across the wooden floor. Obviously, anyone in this situation would probably be shitting a brick, myself included. She became very uneasy and frightened, and had a growing sense that she wasn't welcome in the castle anymore. She dashed outside and ran straight into the engineer. Now this is where the story gets even more spooky. So the engineer said he was shocked to see her outside, because he'd just seen the figure of a lady standing in the Ferrers room window, watching him approach. That day, a new circular table and set of chairs had been placed in the room, yet, on investigation, nothing had moved an inch. Sometimes sounds can be picked up by very sensitive recording equipment, and by far one of the most intriguing recordings picked up at the castle took place in here. When the tape was played back, the sounds of drunken male voices crying out in pain could be overheard over creaking floorboards and smashing glass. It sounded as though a brawl had taken place. The ghostly apparitions of several ladies in Elizabethan dresses have also been seen in the room, as has a large man sitting in front of the fireplace working on a ledger. The southeast battlements are the site of one of the castle's most legendary ghosts, the White Lady. She is said to have been captured and locked in the tower by the wicked Sir Tarquin, with whom she fell deeply in love. In 519, Sir Lancelot came to rescue her and slew Sir Tarquin in the Lady Meadows below the castle, whereupon the distraught lady threw herself over the battlements. Legend has it that she still roams the battlements mourning for her lover. Next we have the nursery. Although this room is presented as a Victorian nursery, it was originally one of the private rooms of the Ferrers family during the 1600s, and it has one or two entities dwelling within its walls. On the odd occasion, tobacco can be smelt, and a man wearing pantaloons and smoking a long clay pipe is seen in the closet. What on earth was he doing in the closet is what I want to know. A tall lady in a red and green Victorian frilled dress has been seen acting in a very petulant manner, throwing things against the wall in a fit of temper. There's also a Victorian man in a bowler hat and an ill-fitting black jacket who paces back and forth with uncertainty. He has a round face and a small bushy moustache, and was probably a servant of the Ferrers. Until recently, no activity was ever reported in Annie Cook's corridor. However, following the replacement of ceiling lights for an event in December 2004, strange things have started happening. In fact, twice during the course of the event, a disembodied voice was heard whispering into people's ears. The voice was clear, but the words were unintelligible. Since then, others have started to experience feelings of lightheadedness, extreme cold, and nausea whilst walking along the corridor. A strong male presence is associated with these sensations, and not a particularly pleasant one either. The cook's bedroom and its adjacent landing make some castle employees feel quite uneasy. During one of the candlelight performances, an actor who had slipped out for a few minutes saw a tall, dark-haired man standing by the glass panel as he glanced through the window on his way back along the battlements. The man seemed to be watching the other actor, and yet she had seen nothing from where she was standing. On another occasion, the room had a decidedly sad and depressing atmosphere, which made those inside it feel increasingly unwelcome. The grief-stricken spirit of a lady named Frances Cook has been seen on numerous occasions, and it's said that she was overcome with unbearable sadness over the loss of her children. Frances lived at the castle with her husband Thomas during the late 1800s. The tragic couple are said to have lost several children as infants, and Frances' spirit has been unable to move on without them. Moving on to the south stairs, this part of the castle contains a lot of ghostly activity. Staff working in the shop and storerooms below have heard two men in deep conversation walking down the stairs, yet found absolutely nobody there upon investigation. A man and woman in Georgian costume have been seen at different times climbing the stairs. The lady was wearing a white dress and heading for the upper landing, while the man came out of the door to the old bridge that accesses the intramural passageway in the curtain wall. Just like in the nursery, there is also often the smell of tobacco in the breakfast parlour when it's first opened up in the morning. Of course, this room also has its fair share of entities. The most commonly seen apparition here is a strict, middle-aged, well-to-do lady dressed in white silk and linen who very much likes to have things her own way. She's sometimes accompanied by a man, dressed in a dark black suit and a tall black hat, and she's also often accompanied by two small children. Honestly, I'm so glad I didn't do this research before touring the castle alone. I really thought the ladies' chamber was the only haunted room in the castle. Little did I know. I might not have been so keen to wander around on my own if I'd known all this beforehand. However, I must admit I did feel quite uneasy when wandering through the drawing room, which upon doing my research just happens to be, you guessed it, haunted. So this room seems to draw a variety of phenomena, ranging from moving orbs, sounds and dark shadows. The most well-known sighting was had by a museum assistant while she was locking up one dull winter's evening. She was drawing the curtains when she sensed that she was being watched, so instinctively she turned around towards the fireplace and saw a woman dressed in Victorian-style black mourning clothes sitting on the green settee. The lady smiled at her, but was gone when the employee turned back to take a second look. The settee in question came from nearby Drayton Manor, so the lady may well be an imported ghost. She's been seen again quite recently by a group doing a vigil in the room. Who she was, we'll probably never know. A very tall man with an intimidating presence has been seen near the main door on more than one occasion, and there are other entities in the room who are seen from time to time who all seem to be from the Victorian era. A man with a trimmed white beard and wearing what might be a naval uniform sits by the fireplace smoking a pipe. He is sometimes accompanied by a lady wearing a green dress. The man may well be the ghost of Thomas Cook, the last tenant of the castle, who has certainly been encountered by people in this room and the breakfast parlour. The lady is thought to be the spirit of his first wife, Emma. Then we come to the Great Hall. This is the principal room of the castle. It dates back to the mid-1400s and has many supernatural tales and sightings linked with it. In the 1940s, Mr. Alsop, the custodian, was awakened one night by the sound of violent crashes, falling armour and breaking glass. It came from the Great Hall and he fully expected to find the huge glass window had fallen in. However, as he reached the doorway, the noise abruptly stopped, and when he looked inside, nothing was out of place, and the moonlight was streaming in through the windows. Although the family had never actually seen anything, they found the atmosphere and noises in the castle to be quite frightening. In 1991, staff watching one of the newly installed monitors saw what looked like a shaft of sunlight moving around the corner of the hall, even though the sun wasn't shining that day. It was rising and falling and going from side to side, and there was a decided chill in the air. The engineer was called in to check the equipment, but he could find nothing wrong with it, and couldn't explain where the light had come from. A large man wearing armour but no helmet has been seen carrying a heavy sword dating from about the time the hall was built. He has dark hair, a beard, and radiates a commanding presence. However, probably the most bizarre phenomenon connected to the Great Hall was encountered by Derek Acora, the famous medium from Living TV's Most Haunted, who picked up on the spirit of a Spanish executioner. Now I must clarify that in my own opinion, anything shown on Most Haunted is staged for TV, and I do believe that Derek Acora was a fraud. However, that doesn't mean that I don't think the Great Hall is haunted. I absolutely do believe it is. Hanging up on the wall is a large executioner's sword that's associated with a malevolent spirit that moves around the castle inflicting temporary pain to the eyes, nose and mouth of unwitting staff and visitors alike. This sword has probably removed many heads in years gone by and holds a lot of residual energy from all of those severed souls. In life, the spirit was said to be a Spanish executioner named Franco Sebastian Solaris. Interestingly, a young girl who recently stayed the night in the hall had a very unpleasant experience when she woke to feel her wrists and legs being bound, and a sensation about her neck, which she likened to being beheaded. It should be noted, she claimed to have no prior knowledge of the ghost of the executioner, and was visibly shaken when told about him. The shop was once part of the living quarters of the castle's custodian, and there is a curious little tale from here that dates back to the 1950s. It was the custodian's bedroom, and one night he and his son were woken by the sensation of cold fingers touching their legs. When they switched the lights on, the room was empty, but their dog was very frightened and wouldn't stop whimpering until they let him out. After that, he simply refused to ever go back into that room. This kind of reminds me of Uncle Tommy's dog on the stairs. You know, they do say that dogs are sensitive to the paranormal. Now we come to the haunted stairs. These stairs have been the focus of many vigils over the years and have their own resident ghost who runs down the stairs in a panic. She's been described as the ghostly apparition of yet another nun, and she's been sensed and seen by several visitors and staff members. It's possible that the nun's spirit arrived with the stairs when they were imported in the late 1700s. Noises like crying and hurried footsteps have been heard on the stairs, but the most notorious sighting of the lady came in 1949 when a group of paranormal investigators came to the castle with the intention of capturing a ghost on film. They set up their vigil at the bottom of the stairs and were tied together with string so that if anyone moved, the others would know. Just after midnight, they heard a rustling noise coming from the room above, and the air became distinctly colder. Then they clearly heard 3 padding footsteps on the stairs, which sounded like someone wearing sandals. They felt as though the sound was rushing towards them. The photographer took a picture, but when the others raised their torches to the stairs expecting to see someone running in their direction, the stairs were completely empty. This picture is the one they took, but is it a ghost or just a shadow, or even, as suggested at the time, an elaborate publicity hoax? Honestly, I don't see anything but a random shadow, but please let me know in the comments what you think. And that brings us to the most haunted room in the entire castle, the ladies' chamber, otherwise known as the haunted bedroom. Once the private room, or the sala of the Marmions, This room is also the lady's bedroom and is the middle room of the tower. This room has seen more vigils than anywhere else in the castle, and doesn't usually disappoint the ardent ghost hunter with moving shadows, flickering lights, noises, and cold spots. Legend has it that the Black Lady or Grey Lady, depending on your information source, haunts this room. She was a 9th century nun called Editha, who was expelled from Polesworth Abbey by the first Baron Marmion. The continued prayers of her homeless nuns eventually called her from her grave, and one night in 1139, after a lavish banquet, the 3rd Baron, Robert Marmion, was visited by her ghost whilst in his bedchamber. Saint Editha's ghost prophesied that unless the nuns were restored to Polesworth, he would meet an untimely and painful death. Then, just before she vanished, she struck him on his side with the point of her crozier, and the wound was so terrible that the whole castle was awoken by his cries. Seeing him so tormented with pain, his friends advised him to confess himself to a priest and restore the nuns to the abbey. His pain only ceased when this vow was taken and the nuns were allowed to return. Upon the death of his father, shortly before November 1129, he gave away some of his estates to the nuns of Polesworth Abbey and the monks of Bardney Abbey. Unfortunately, the story didn't end there for poor Robert, who was knocked off his horse during a battle in nearby Coventry, snapping the femur of his thigh. So if there's one bone you don't want to break, it's probably the femur. With it being the largest and strongest bone in the body, it takes one hell of a fall to break it. After falling from his horse, poor old Robert was beheaded by a common soldier. Not a glorious ending by any means. More recently, the room was the site of the last vigil undertaken by the team from the popular Most Haunted television series. The room felt quite normal until they all heard a creak, whereupon they invited the spirits to contact them. With that, there was a loud bang from the bottom of the haunted stairs, which are just outside the haunted bedroom, and the remote locked-off camera moved to the left of its own accord. They repeated the request for any spirits to communicate with them, and then suddenly and quite unexpectedly, the fire alarm went off. The engineer who came to reset the system could find no reason at all for the alarm to have been triggered, so just who or what set it off remains a mystery. Again, I'd take anything shown on Most Haunted with a pinch of salt, but according to them, that's what happened. That brings our haunted tour of Tamworth Castle to an end. For more ghostly content, click on this video right here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. I'm your host, Severed Soul.